They gathered us before dawn, when the light was still a pallid smear crawling across the horizon, when even the air seemed reluctant to rise from its slumber. The sky above the motor yard was the color of old parchment, veined with smoke, and the ground beneath our boots was slick with oil and sanctified spillage. Machine blood, they called it. We stood in ranks between the looming forms of the armored beasts that would carry us to glory or to damnation. Most of us already knew which. The air tasted of burnt incense and ozone, of sanctified oils that the tech priests had poured over the tanks in the night, whispering their litanies in Bin-Harik tongues we could not understand. The echoes still clung to the metal, vibrating faintly, like the aftertaste of a prayer half heard. Our sergeant, a man whose face was more scar than skin, barked us into stillness. His bionic eye glowed faintly, reflecting the dawn's weak light like a heretic's lantern. "On your knees," he said. "You kneel not before the flesh, but before the throne." We obeyed. The ground was cold, seeping through the thin fabric of our fatigues. A dozen tanks loomed before us, hulks of sanctified iron, their hulls etched with the aquila, with prayers and benedictions scrawled in machine script. I remember the one that would be ours, a squat, brutal engine of faith and fury. Its armor was pitted, layered in rust like scabbed flesh, and along its flank ran the names of those who had died within it. There were many. Some of the letters were worn smooth by time. The tech priest approached, his robes dragging across the ground with the whisper of cables on stone. His face was a patchwork of flesh and bronze, his mouth a grate from which steam hissed with every syllable. In one mechanical hand he held a censer that spilled fragrant smoke, myrrh, perhaps, or the burnt remains of something once holy. He began the litany of bonding, his voice a metallic dirge. "Steel be thy flesh, oil be thy blood, faith be thy ignition, fury thy fuel. Know that thy soul is no longer thine own, it is grafted to the engine of his will." As he spoke, the sergeant passed along the oath slates, thin metal tablets engraved with the Emperor's symbol. We pressed our thumbs to the icons, and blood welled up, drawn by the slate's sharp edge. Our blood was our seal, our obedience was our life. When it came to me, I hesitated only a breath. The slate felt warm, almost pulsing. I pressed my thumb down until I felt the sting, and watched a bead of crimson spread across the sigil. The tech priest's gaze found me then, lenses whirring as they focused. "Blessed be the offering," he rasped, voice like grinding gears. "The machine drinks and remembers." We were told the Emperor himself watched as we took the oath. I did not believe that then, still don't. But I remember how the light broke across the tanks, scattering into shards of gold, and how the smoke curled upward like souls ascending. For a moment, I almost felt something divine in the air. Almost. Then came the touch of steel. The sergeant motioned us forward, one by one, to lay our hands upon the hull of the beast that would be our home. I stepped toward it, feeling the tremor of the machine beneath the metal, some internal rhythm, a slow pulse. The air around it was warmer, alive somehow. I placed my palm against the aquila carved into its flank. The metal was cold at first, then warmer, as if the tank drew heat from my hand. The edges of the engraving were sharp, biting into my flesh. I traced the twin-headed eagle with my fingertips, feeling the gouges, the repairs, the layers of paint and sanctified sealant that marked its history. The surface vibrated faintly, not from the wind, but from something deeper like a heartbeat muffled by armor. "I name you penance," the sergeant said, his voice echoing through the yard. "For all who enter you shall pay their due." A murmur of approval rose among the crew. I tasted rust on my tongue. The tech priest extended his mechadendrite and marked the tank's prow with a line of sacred oil. "She is bound," he intoned. "Spirit and crew, one in servitude. May the machine spirit be merciful." That was the first time I heard the term machine spirit spoken as though it were alive, aware. I would come to learn that it was both less and far more than that. After the rites, we were made to repeat the oath of steel. It was long, full of ancient words, most of which none of us understood, but we knew the meaning behind them. Obedience, sacrifice, silence. "I am the flesh that feeds the furnace. I am the breath that stirs the pistons. I am the faith that ignites the engine. My life is bound to the hull, my death to its glory. Through steel, I endure. Through flame, I am redeemed. When the final word left my lips, I felt something close over me like a lid being sealed. A weight, invisible, but absolute. That was the moment I ceased to be a man. I became a component. We celebrated that night with what passed for rations. Grain bricks softened with recycled water and a thin smear of nutrient paste that tasted of copper and incense. The sergeant allowed us half a measure of a marsec, each, a rare generosity. We drank in silence beneath the tank's shadow, the way penitents might pray beneath a relic. Our driver, Karen, was a broad man with the build of a forge worker and the eyes of someone who'd already accepted his death. He ran a hand along the track links, feeling for imperfections. "She's old," he said quietly. "Older than the regiment. Older than your faith," muttered Soth, the gunner. He spat onto the ground. "You can hear her hum when the wind's right, like she's dreaming." Our loader, Rill, gave a low chuckle. "Dreaming of what? Blood or glory?" Soth shrugged. "Same thing." I didn't speak. I was still listening to the faint creak of metal cooling, to the low moan of the wind as it passed through the exhaust vents. Somewhere deep inside the hull, something clicked, like a gear shifting on its own. "She's hungry," Karen said, almost reverently. The sergeant's shadow fell over us. "Then feed her well," he said. "Tomorrow, she drinks the Sunday." I didn't sleep that night. The barracks stank of sweat and oil, of sanctified incense that clung to everything like guilt. The walls were thin, and through them I could hear the distant clatter of tech priests working through the dark hours, reciting their prayers as they anointed every gear and piston. The sound reminded me of insects crawling inside metal bones. When I finally closed my eyes, I dreamed of the tank not as a machine, but as something living. Its hull was flesh, its heart an engine that throbbed with molten blood. I stood inside it, entombed, while it whispered in a voice like shifting sand, "Serve, and be forgotten." I woke with the taste of iron in my mouth. At dawn, the sirens called us to the yard once more. The light was harsher this time, slicing through the haze like a blade. The tech priest was gone, replaced by his acolytes, who moved like ghosts between the rows of machines. The sergeant stood before us, his expression carved from stone. "Crew penance. Mount up." The hatch yawned open with a hiss of pressurized air. I caught the first whiff of the inside hot metal, burnt oil, stale breath from crews long dead. The stench was thick, oppressive. One by one, we climbed inside. The moment I crossed the threshold, the light dimmed, replaced by the amber glow of lumen strips. The air was heavy, close. The sound of my own breathing echoed off the walls. The walls themselves were alive with inscriptions, sigils of protection, fragments of scripture etched into the plating. Someone had scratched words into the metal above the loader's station. "Steel remembers." Karen settled into the driver's seat, his hands tracing the controls like a priest handling relics. Soth took his place at the gunner's sights, muttering a short prayer. Rill stowed the shells, each one marked with purity seals. I found my station near the Vox panel, where static whispered constantly like a voice just beyond hearing. The sergeant climbed in last, sealing the hatch behind him with a grinding twist. The sound echoed like a tomb closing. In that moment, I understood what he meant when he said we were entombed, but blessed. The air was thin, the light dim, the metal warm around us. It felt like being swallowed by something vast and patient. The sergeant's voice came through the intercom, calm but absolute. "Remember your oaths. The Emperor sees through the eyes of iron. There is no fear within steel." We repeated the phrase in unison. There is no fear within steel. But I felt it there, beneath the rhythm of the engine, beneath the scent of oil and sanctity. The steel had its own hunger, its own pulse, and deep down I knew it would drink before the campaign's end. They sealed us inside the tank at first light. The hatch clanged shut with a sound that seemed to echo through my ribs. The air changed immediately thicker, recycled, touched with a hint of oil and the faint sweetness of the incense that had been burned to placate the machine spirit. It was the scent of devotion and confinement mixed as one. The world outside vanished, replaced by a womb of iron. The inner lamps glowed a dull amber, casting the compartment in uneven halos of light. Dust motes danced in the still air, floating between us like tiny prayers that would never reach the Emperor. I could feel the hull pressing against me from all sides. There was no real space to move, only the narrow compartments that defined our roles. Karen hunched at the driver's seat, shoulders brushing the metal bulkhead. Soth leaned forward into the gunner's cradle, his eye already pressed against the scope. Rill crouched beside the loader's rack, resting his hand on the casing of the nearest shell as though drawing comfort from its cold promise. I sat at the Vox console, my duty to commune with the unseen voices that ruled our lives. Static whispered from the grill, a restless sigh that seemed to pulse in rhythm with the engine's idle thrum. For the first hour, none of us spoke. The sergeant had forbidden idle chatter. Silence was the first discipline of the armored corps. He said words were like sparks too many, and something would burn that wasn't meant to. Instead, we listened. To the steady pulse of the cooling system, to the grind of the suspension beneath us, to the faint drip of condensation running down an unseen pipe. The machine breathed around us, a deep mechanical respiration. The hull flexed occasionally with a sound like bones settling. Soth broke the silence first. "You hear that?" Karen grunted. "Hear what?" "That sound." "Like..." He paused, listening. "Like it's whispering." "That's the air circulator," Rill said, his tone half bored. "You want silence? Go die outside. You'll hear plenty of it there." Soth gave a dry chuckle. "I might take that offer someday." The sergeant didn't bother reprimanding him. He was staring at the cogitator shrine welded near the main turret column, a small alcove of brass and steel, adorned with purity seals, tiny votive candles, and a hanging icon of the Emperor carved in relief. Its surface was blackened from years of smoke. Above it, in stenciled letters, someone long ago had painted, "Serve unto rust." The sergeant muttered a short benediction under his breath. "By oil and fire, by faith and flesh." His gauntlet touched the icon briefly, a gesture as automatic as breathing. Every tank had its shrine, and every crew learned quickly that to neglect it was to invite disaster. The machine spirit was temperamental, easily angered. If you forgot to light incense before ignition, it might stall, fail to recite the litanies of motion, and the gears might seize mid-battle. There were stories of tanks that turned their guns upon their own crews after blasphemy. I didn't believe them then, but the more hours we spent inside, the more I began to feel the presence behind the rituals, not divine, but watchful. As if the tank knew, time became a blur inside the hull. The absence of natural light dissolved the sense of hours. We measured existence in engine cycles, fuel readings, and the slow rhythm of our breath. Karen murmured to himself as he adjusted the drive levers. His hands were steady, but his lips moved constantly, repeating fragments of the driver's cant. "Blessed be the piston. Blessed be the track. May the road unfold in obedience beneath me." The sound became a mantra that filled the cramped space, mingling with the hum of the power unit. By midday, the heat began to rise. The vents pushed out air thick with machine musk and recycled sweat. Every breath felt heavier, as if the tank was exhaling into our lungs instead of the other way around. The metal beneath my palms grew warm, almost alive. "Feels like she's sweating," Rill muttered, wiping his brow. "She's just getting used to you," Karen replied with a faint grin. Soth snorted. "You think she likes us?" "She'll like what the Emperor commands her to like," said the sergeant flatly. "Show her devotion, and she'll serve. Doubt, and she'll make you pay for it." We fell quiet again. Somewhere deep within the tank, the coolant system kicked on a low growl that vibrated through the floor and up our spines. I felt my teeth ache from the resonance. That night, or what passed for it, we ate our rations cold. Protein paste squeezed from a tube, washed down with metallic water. We ate in shifts so someone always kept watch on the systems. The sergeant said the machine spirit disliked inattentive crew. As I chewed, I studied the flickering gauges. One dial trembled slightly, the needle quivering just below the red line. "Driver, your coolant pressure's high." Karen glanced at the dial and frowned. Shouldn't be. Haven't pushed her yet. The sergeant moved closer, checking the valve. Pray harder, then. Karen nodded and whispered another verse of the cant. The gauge steadied slowly, as if soothed by his faith. That was when I began to understand what it meant to live entombed. It wasn't just the walls, or the heat, or the recycled air. It was the slow realization that the tank had moods, and that our survival depended on appeasing them. The first time we ran a systems test, the roar nearly deafened me. The engine ignited with a shudder that shook the entire hull. The noise was a living thing, an unbroken scream of power and fury that drowned out thought itself. "Saints preserve us," Rill muttered. "She's angry." "Not angry," said Karen. "Awake." We began the ritual of ignition, then each of us reciting our parts in turn. By the Omnissiah's spark, awaken. By the Emperor's will, obey. By the faith of the crew, endure. The sergeant's voice carried above the din. Steel is truth. Flesh is weakness. Obedience is survival. When the words ended, the roar settled into a low, steady rhythm. The lights brightened. I felt the vibration of the tracks engage beneath us, a pulse that traveled up through the soles of my boots, into my bones. We began to move. The first motion was always the strangest, like being born into motion after hours of stillness. The walls seemed to shift, the floor tilting slightly as the suspension adjusted. I gripped the Vox handle to steady myself. "Throttle steady," said the sergeant. Karen responded with a grunt. "Throttle steady." The machine rumbled forward, treads grinding against the ferrocrete of the motor yard. The sound was deafening, the vibrations constant. Dust drifted from the ceiling in lazy spirals. We rolled for what felt like hours, though it might have been less. The only view of the outside came through the commander's periscope, a narrow slit of distorted light. Everything else was metal, shadow, and heat. Soth called out, firing parameters at random, practicing. The click of the elevation gears was rhythmic, hypnotic. I found myself mouthing prayers without realizing it, the words spilling out as naturally as breathing. The tank had a way of drawing them from you, as though it demanded verbal proof of faith. Later, when the engine cooled and the hum faded, we sat in the dimness listening to the faint crackle of the Vox. The static sometimes formed shapes of sound, half voices, whispers. Once, I thought I heard a phrase buried within it. "Do you hear us?" I froze. "Someone on the line?" asked the sergeant. "No, sir," I said quickly. "Just interference." He gave a long, measured look. "Don't let the ghosts talk to you, trooper. That's how men go mad in steel." "Yes, sir." But I could still hear it, the faint echo, like breathing through broken glass. By the third day, the air filters had taken on the sour stink of sweat and oil. The sergeant rationed our incense, burning only a pinch before ignition. The smoke coiled through the cramped space, clinging to our uniforms and mixing with the tang of machine grease. Every surface was slick to the touch, condensation from our breath gathering on the cold metal, then running down in thin, greasy lines. Sleep came in fragments. I would drift off sitting upright, my head knocking softly against the Vox unit. Dreams bled into waking moments until I couldn't tell the difference. In those half-sleeps, I would hear the tank murmuring soft metallic sighs, words formed from the creak of rivets and the pulse of the coolant lines. It didn't speak like a man. It spoke like a storm behind walls. Once, during a long idle, Soth began tapping his fingers on the barrel housing in rhythm with the engine. The sound resonated strangely. "Stop that," said the sergeant sharply. Soth froze. "Why?" "She doesn't like rhythm unless it's hers," the sergeant replied. "You'll confuse her." We all fell silent. It was then that I understood fully. The machine wasn't merely ours to command. It was a god of its own kind, a caged deity of iron and oil. And we were its priests, confined in its belly, feeding it prayers and sweat. By the end of that first week, we spoke less and less. Language became unnecessary. We learned to communicate in gestures, nods, shared glances. Every movement was economical. Every breath was rationed. Sometimes I thought I could feel my heart sinking to the pulse of the engine. And at night, when the lamps dimmed and the hull cooled, I would sit by the shrine and whisper to the icon of the Emperor. But I was no longer sure which god I was praying to, the one on the throne, or the one made of steel around me. The answer, I think, was both. The first battle came before dawn, though dawn never truly broke, only a pale imitation of light crawling through a sky already ruined by ash. We were awakened by the siren's wail, a rising metallic scream that filled the barracks and rattled the loose plates on the walls. The sound of war is never clean. It begins like sickness, slow, suffocating, inevitable. "Mount up," the sergeant barked. "Saints, guide your hands, or the machine will not." We obeyed as always. Obedience was survival, and survival, they told us, was the Emperor's will. The tank's hatch closed above us with a resounding clang, sealing us away from the world once more. The air inside was damp and stifling, already alive with the smell of heated oil. The ignition rites had been performed in the night, but still Keren whispered the litany of motion beneath his breath. The others followed in murmurs, a chorus of faith for the god that was our war engine. I did not pray. I simply listened to the growl of the engine, to the hiss of hydraulics waking like sinew, to the faint heartbeat of the hull beneath my palms. When the order came through the Vox advance, the machine answered with a roar that drowned out every human voice. The vibration tore through the soles of my boots, up my spine, until my teeth ached. We lurched forward, treads biting into the earth. Outside, the ground trembled beneath our weight. Keren guided us through the haze. His hands were sure, his eyes half-lidded in concentration. "Throttle steady," he muttered. "Blessed pressure, blessed track." His words were like a hymn, swallowed by the growl of the drive motor. Through the periscope slit, I saw only fragments. A horizon painted in fire, silhouettes of tanks moving like black phantoms through the smoke. Beyond them, artillery flares bloomed like diseased suns. The Vox crackled in my ear, half orders, half prayers, an endless stream of voices, all pleading to the same indifferent god. "Keep formation," came a voice, distant, metallic. "Emperor guides. Fire when the order comes." The sergeant's reply was a curt click. We rolled onward. The sound inside the tank grew unbearable. The roar of the engine merged with the scream of the gears, with the steady thump of the tracks crushing debris. Every vibration became a second heartbeat in my chest. The air reeked of heated metal and machine oil, so thick it coated the tongue. Soth crouched at the sights, his face lit by the flickering green glow of the targeting auspex. "Rangefinder locked," he said, voice tight. "Targets ahead. Trench line, maybe 200 meters. The sergeant leaned over him. "Confirm." "I confirm." "Then burn them." Soth's hand hovered over the trigger rune. For a moment, I thought I saw hesitation in his eyes. Then the rune flared red beneath his touch. The world detonated. The cannon's recoil was a physical thing, a sledgehammer blow through the hull. I felt it in my bones, a shudder that stripped all thought away. My ears rang, my vision blurred. The thunderclap of the shot was followed by a second sound, something distant, human. Screams, faint and brief, smothered by the machine's roar. Rill was already reloading. His movements were mechanical, practiced. He slammed another shell into the breech, wiped his hands, and muttered the prayer of the second chamber. The sergeant's voice was calm. "Fire again." We obeyed. Shot after shot, impact after impact. The smell of propellant filled the compartment, sharp and chemical, burning the throat. The walls grew warm beneath our hands, as though the tank itself drank the heat and fed on it. Outside, the sky pulsed with flashes of orange and white, each one a brief imitation of the Sunday. Through the periscope I saw them, shapes in the smoke, running, falling, burning. They looked small, almost insect-like, before they vanished in the next explosion. I could not see their faces, only the outlines of their deaths. It was over quickly. Battles always are, at least for those who live through them. Time stretches inside the tank, but outside everything ends in seconds. The silence that followed was worse than the noise. The air was thick with the stink of hot brass and burnt oil. Sweat ran down our necks, pooling beneath our collars. The only sound was the faint hiss of cooling metal. "Status," said the sergeant. "All systems green," Karen replied automatically. "Ammo stable. No hull breach." Soth said nothing. He was staring through the scope, unmoving. "Gunner," said the sergeant. "Report." Soth didn't turn. "They didn't even run," he whispered. "They just looked up." The sergeant placed a gloved hand on his shoulder. "Do not look back, Soth. That's the first rule. You serve the Emperor, not the dead." Soth nodded slowly, but I saw his fingers tremble. We were ordered to hold position while the line advanced. The engine idled, growling softly beneath us. Through the hull, I could feel the faint tremors of distant bombardment. Each vibration was another life extinguished, another victory we would never see. I found myself staring at the shrine again. The candles had melted down to blackened stubs. The brass icon was warm to the touch. I wondered how many crews had prayed to it before us, how many names had burned away into the metal. Hours passed in silence. When the sun, or what passed for it, finally broke through the haze, it was red. The world outside glowed as if submerged in blood. Karen killed the engine, and the sudden quiet made my ears ring. Without the roar, the tank felt empty, like a corpse without breath. The sergeant finally spoke. "Dismount check." We obeyed, opening the hatch with a hiss of pressurized air. The first breath of open air hit me like a slap. It reeked of cordite and charred soil, but it was real. I climbed out into the light and looked around. The battlefield stretched endlessly, blackened earth, twisted wrecks, and trenches reduced to mud-filled scars. The air shimmered with heat and smoke. In the distance, I saw movement Medicae servitors dragging bodies into piles, marking them with wax seals for identification that would never come. The ground beneath my boots was soft. I looked down and saw why. Ash. And something darker mixed with it. I turned away quickly. Rill joined me, wiping grime from his face. His eyes were hollow. "You smell it?" "Yes." "Burnt meat," he said flatly. "Same as every war I've seen. Flesh always smells the same when it dies." Soth climbed out last, his gaze fixed on the horizon. We didn't even see their faces. The sergeant's voice came from below. "That's mercy. The Emperor spares you the burden of recognition." He emerged, lighting a fresh stick of incense and holding it before the tank's hull. The smoke curled upward, pale and ghostly. He murmured the litany of gratitude. "Steel, you have done the Emperor's work. Flesh, you have served your purpose. May both be cleansed in fire." We joined in, our voices uneven but earnest. The ritual mattered. It reminded us there was still a barrier between us and the thing that waited beneath the armor. When the prayer ended, the sergeant looked at each of us in turn. "This was your baptism. You are tank-born now. Remember what it feels like." None of us answered. That night, we camped beside the vehicle. The wind carried the sound of distant bombardments like waves breaking against the edge of the world. Our rations tasted of ash. The stars were hidden behind the smoke, and the light from the fires turned the clouds into a ceiling of blood. I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw flashes, the glare of the cannon, silhouettes disintegrating. My ears rang with phantom screams. I wanted to pray, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, I sat with my back to the hull and listened to the faint tick of cooling metal. It sounded almost like breathing. Soth stirred beside me. "You think they felt anything?" I looked at him. His face was pale, streaked with soot. "I don't know." He nodded slowly, staring into the fire. "Maybe that's the mercy. Maybe they felt nothing at all." We didn't speak after that. When dawn came again, we were ordered forward. The campaign was just beginning, though it already felt eternal. The tank roared to life beneath us, obedient, hungry, and as we rolled toward the next horizon, I realized something had changed. Before that day, I had feared death. After it, I feared survival. They told us the siege would last a week. They lied. By the time the sun had vanished beneath the choking smog for the 100th time, the word week had lost meaning entirely. We counted time by the number of shells we fired, the number of times the filters clogged, the number of corpses we crushed beneath our treads. The city, if you could still call it that, was a ruin long before we arrived. Dustfall, they named it, though I suspect that was never its true name. Perhaps once it had towers, gardens, even laughter. By the time we reached its outskirts, it was little more than a graveyard of concrete and ash. The dust came first. Always the dust. It seeped through every crack in the hull, through every imperfect seal. No matter how often we scrubbed the vents, how tightly we bound the filters, it always found a way in. Fine, grey, endless, sifting through the air until it coated our tongues and gums, filled the corners of our eyes, turned our skin the color of decay. Karen swore he could taste the dead in it. He wasn't wrong. When we first encircled the city, morale was still high, or at least something resembling it. We still had water, ration paste, a working vox. The sergeant still spoke in complete sentences rather than single, rasping orders. The first bombardment began on the second day. From inside the tank, we could see the city's silhouette through the periscope, a jagged skyline, black against a sky thick with dust. The air trembled as our artillery opened fire, row upon row of sacred thunder shaking the world. We joined in, our own cannon roaring like a wounded god. Each shell we fired vanished into the grey distance, followed by a ripple of light, then a thunderclap that rolled through the earth like the growl of something vast beneath the soil. Hours passed that way, firing, reloading, firing again. The rhythm became liturgical. Rill muttered the rite of projection each time he loaded a shell, his voice hoarse from repetition. Through faith, may this shot fly true. Through flame, may it burn the unworthy. By the 10th hour, he'd stopped using words. He simply kissed the casing before slamming it into place. When night came, not that you could tell, the bombardment didn't stop. The sky glowed red from the constant fire. I remember thinking that this was what hell must look like. Not a place of torment, but a horizon that never darkens, burning without end. On the 5th day, they returned fire. The first impact struck a few meters to our left. The shockwave lifted the tank slightly before slamming it back down. Every light in the cabin flickered. "Armor holding," Karen said, though his voice shook. "Praise the machine spirit." The second shell landed closer. Dust poured through the vents like breath from a corpse's mouth. The sergeant barked orders. "Hold formation. Return fire." Soth complied. His hands no longer trembled when he fired. They moved with the cold precision of habit. The recoil rocked us again and again until the sensation of movement and violence became indistinguishable. The air inside the tank grew thick with smoke and heat. Sweat stung our eyes. The coolant lines rattled like bones. When we paused to reload, I could hear the sound of impacts striking nearby hulls, metal tearing, men screaming through the vox before their signals went silent. Outside, the world had become a blizzard of dust. Visibility dropped to nothing. The periscope showed only shifting grey, punctuated by the brief glow of explosions. "Optics are useless," Soth said. "I can't see a thing." "Then aim by faith," the sergeant replied. "She'll guide your hand." And somehow, she did. Each time Soth fired blind, we felt the satisfying concussive echo of a hit through the ground. The tank trembled in approval, as if the machine spirit itself purred with pride. By the 3rd week, the dust had infiltrated everything. Our food came in grey lumps. The water ration tasted of rust. The filters choked hourly. I'd scrape them clean with a knife, but the residue always returned. Rill developed a cough, a wet, rattling sound that filled the silence between engine pulses. He tried to hide it, but the sergeant noticed. "Keep your sickness to yourself," he said. "The machine spirit tolerates no weakness." Rill smiled weakly. "Then she'll have to make do. We're all weak in here." The sergeant struck him hard, backhanded. The sound of the impact was dull against the metallic backdrop. "Watch your tongue, loader. You speak of holiness with filth." Rill didn't answer. He just wiped the blood from his lip and whispered, "Forgive me, Saint Steel." After that, we spoke less. The siege stretched on. Each day was the same cycle. Wake, fire, repair, pray, repeat. Sleep came in stolen fragments, curled against the hot walls of the hull. The engine became our lullaby, the vibration our heartbeat. We no longer distinguished between our sweat and the condensation dripping from the ceiling. The air was so thick with breath and oil that my skin felt coated in a permanent sheen. The Vox crackled occasionally, spitting fragments of orders through the static. Once, I thought I heard someone screaming for retreat, but the sergeant muted the channel before I could make sense of it. "Noise," he said. "Don't let it poison your faith." The outside world ceased to exist. There was only the tank, the dust, the endless repetition. I began to dream with my eyes open. Sometimes I thought I saw faces forming in the grime that clung to the walls, mouths open in silent prayer or accusation. Once, I reached out to wipe them away, and the condensation streaked red under my glove. I didn't mention it. Some things are better left unspoken. On the 32nd day, the enemy breached the perimeter. They came through the ruins like shadows, figures half seen in the dust, moving with inhuman persistence. The first sign was the rattle of small arms fire against our hull, the sharp ping 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 that sounded almost delicate compared to the cannon's roar. "Close range!" Karen shouted. "They're crawling over the wrecks." Soth swung the turret toward the sound. The sergeant fed him coordinates through the periscope. Elevation 30. Range 50. Confirmed. Fire. The shell exploded barely 30 meters from us. The blast rocked the tank, shaking loose a cascade of dust from the ceiling. Through the periscope, I saw bodies flung into the air, dark shapes turning end over end before vanishing in the smoke. We kept firing until the ground around us became a shifting sea of mud and bone. When the order came to cease fire, the silence that followed was unbearable. All we could hear was the soft ping of cooling metal and the slow drip of condensation from the vents. The smell inside the tank had changed, thicker, fouler, a mixture of machine oil and human fear. Weeks passed, or perhaps months. I can't be sure. We lost track of time when the chronometer failed. The lights dimmed more often. The engine grew temperamental, requiring longer and longer rites to start. The machine spirit was restless. The sergeant ordered us to double our devotions. Twice a day we performed the full litany, burning incense until the cabin filled with acrid smoke. The fumes made us dizzy, but it calmed the spirit, or so we told ourselves. Rill's cough worsened. Blood flecked his lips now. The sergeant refused to open the hatch for medical aid. "He'll live until the Emperor decrees otherwise," he said. He didn't. Rill died quietly one night, slumped beside the loader's rack. His eyes were open, glassy, his skin gray as the dust that covered him. We sat in silence for a long time before the sergeant finally spoke. "He served. The machine spirit is appeased. What do we do with him?" Soth asked. "Leave him where he is. The tank accepts all offerings." We obeyed. By morning, the body had cooled and stiffened. We lashed him in place with utility straps to keep him from shifting when we moved. Karen murmured a prayer as he checked the driver's controls. Blessed be his journey through the gears. The sergeant didn't respond. When we started the engine again, the noise sounded different, deeper, smoother, almost content. The siege never ended so much as it simply faded into permanence. The city was gone, flattened under months of shelling, but we were still there, still firing, still breathing recycled air that stank of sweat and sanctity. Dustfall was no longer a place. It was a condition, a sickness that infected our lungs, our thoughts, our dreams. Sometimes, I think we became part of it. The sergeant stopped marking the days. Soth stopped speaking altogether. Karen drove by instinct, eyes half closed, hands steady as clockwork. I kept the Vox alive even though no one answered anymore. The static had its own kind of comfort. One night, I thought I heard a voice in it again. Not orders, not interference, just a whisper, faint and soft. "You envy them, don't you?" I turned the dial sharply, but the voice was gone. Only static remained. Still, it was right. We envied the dead. When the dust finally settled, if it ever truly did, the city was silent. The order to advance never came. The Vox remained dead. The fuel gauge crept toward empty. The sergeant stood before the shrine, hands clasped. His voice was raw from disuse. "The Emperor tests us," he said. "We endure because he wills it." No one replied. Karen leaned back in his seat, eyes closed. "If this is his will," he muttered, "then mercy is long dead." I wanted to tell him to stop, to take it back, but the words never left my mouth. The hull groaned softly, as though the machine had heard him. The lights flickered once, then steadied, and I swear just for a moment I felt something move beneath my boots. A vibration, slow and deliberate, like a heartbeat waking beneath layers of dust. They said the siege would last a week, but I think it's still happening. Somewhere, the dust still falls. Somewhere, the tank still breathes, and we are still inside. The tech priest died on the 39th day of the siege, or perhaps the 40th. By then, time had curdled into a single unbroken hour, one that stretched on forever, rotting at the edges. He was outside when it happened, walking between the tank lines to bless the machines before dawn. We heard the whine of incoming shells, then the impact, one clean strike, a geyser of dust and flame. When it cleared, nothing of him remained, but fragments of crimson robe, fluttering like torn wings in the wind. The sergeant ordered us to stay sealed inside. The rites could wait, he said. But even through the armor, I could smell it, that sweet, metallic scent of vaporized flesh and sanctified oil. The tech priest had been our tether to the divine mechanisms that ruled the machine. Without him, we were orphans, children trapped in a cathedral that no longer spoke. The silence that followed was not peace. It was warning. The first signs came quietly. A flicker in the lumen strips, a hesitation in the turret's rotation, a low vibration in the hull, like the growl of something restless beneath the floor. Karen checked the gauges. "Pressure's steady," he said. "Could be nothing." The sergeant frowned. "The machine spirit does not suffer nothing. It suffers neglect. Begin the invocation." We performed the rite as best we could, repeating the canticle of operation from memory. The words tasted wrong without the priest's voice leading them, flat, incomplete. When the engine finally started, it did so with a sound I'd never heard before. A deep, wet thump, like the first heartbeat of a thing waking from a long sleep. The hull shuddered, and for a moment I swore the air grew warmer, almost pulsing. "She's displeased," Soth muttered. "She knows he's gone." "Then we'll make her remember our faith," the sergeant said. "Double incense, twice the prayers." We did as ordered. The smoke filled the cabin, thick and acrid. It stung the eyes, burned the throat. My lungs ached, but I kept chanting, the words spilling out like a desperate confession. "Blessed be thy pistons, O vessel of the Emperor. Blessed be thy gears, thy treads, thy fire. Through our flesh, thou art made whole." The lights steadied. The engine purred. For a while the tank seemed calm again. But that night, the whispers began. They came from the Vox at first, a faint crackle between static bursts, patterns that shouldn't have been there. I was half asleep when I heard it, a voice so soft I almost mistook it for memory. "Are you listening?" I jolted upright. The others stirred, muttering curses. "What is it?" Karen asked. "Something on the Vox," I said. "A voice." Soth rubbed his eyes. "You're hearing ghosts." "Maybe," I murmured. But even as I spoke, the whisper returned. "I remember you." The words were thin, mechanical, spoken not through breath, but through vibration. The sergeant was awake now. "Shut it down," he ordered. I cut power to the Vox. The whisper ceased, leaving only the low hum of the engine and the slow creak of the hull. "Just feedback," Karen said, though he didn't sound convinced. The sergeant looked at me. "Say nothing of this to the others. The machine spirit listens. It rewards faith, not fear." I nodded, but I couldn't shake the feeling that the machine had spoken not as metaphor, but as truth. The next morning, the turret refused to turn. No amount of manual override, no coaxing from Soth, no invocations could make it move. The targeting auspex flickered with erratic runes, all meaningless. "She's fighting us," Karen muttered. The sergeant barked him into silence. "She is testing us. Recite the benediction of alignment." We chanted until our throats were raw, but the turret remained frozen. Finally, the sergeant made a decision. "Blood offering," he said. Soth blinked. "Sir?" "She requires sacrifice. The Omnissiah accepts flesh in place of oil when necessary." No one moved. The sergeant drew his combat blade and looked at each of us in turn. "The priest's death has left her untethered. We will restore balance, by devotion or by suffering. I don't know why I did it. Perhaps I was simply tired. Perhaps I wanted to believe that the machine truly cared, that it demanded meaning from our misery." I held out my hand. "Use mine." The sergeant nodded once. "Faithful." He drew the blade across my palm. The cut was shallow but sharp. Blood welled up, warm and vivid against the grey grime. It dripped onto the deck, onto the edge of the cogitator shrine. The moment it touched the metal, the turret groaned. A low, grinding sound filled the cabin. The gun shifted, slow at first, then smoother, aligning with the external coordinates. Karen gasped. "It's working." The sergeant sheathed his blade. "See? She is appeased. She remembers us now." I wrapped my hand in a strip of cloth and said nothing. But in the hum of the engine, beneath the pulse of the machinery, I swore I could hear something new, a rhythm, faint but alive, a heartbeat. After that, the machine grew, responsive. When Karen prayed before ignition, the engine started instantly. When Soth muttered curses, the recoil shuddered violently enough to knock him backward. The sergeant became almost devout in his attention. He cleaned the shrine daily, polished the brass with the edge of his sleeve, whispered private prayers that none of us were allowed to hear. The tank's temper changed with his moods. If he was calm, the machine purred like a contented beast. If he was angry, the engine roared and the lights flickered. If he despaired, the air grew colder, heavy with static. We began to believe that it could feel us, that the bond between steel and flesh had gone both ways. One evening, as we sat in silence, the Vox came alive again, not with whispers this time, but with a low, rhythmic hum like the drone of distant machinery. Then came a sound almost like breathing, slow and deliberate. Soth stiffened. "Tell me that's interference." I turned the dials. "It's coming from inside the system." The sergeant's face was unreadable. "Don't touch it." The sound deepened, vibrating through the hull. The floor beneath us seemed to move not much, just a subtle pulse. Then came the voice. "I am not gone." It was the same mechanical tone, but stronger now, filled with resonance that made the metal itself vibrate. "I am the iron that endures. The flesh is fleeting." Karen whispered a prayer under his breath. The sergeant stepped forward. "We hear you, Holy One. We serve." The lights dimmed briefly, then flared. The engine revved without touch. "Then feed me." The voice faded. The hum remained. None of us spoke for a long time. When we finally did, the sergeant's voice was quiet. "Tomorrow, we ride again." The next battle came without warning. Enemy artillery struck from the ruins, sharp, precise, relentless. The ground shook beneath us as we rolled forward, dust and debris cascading over the hull. Soth called out targets, his voice cracking with exhaustion. Karen drove through the chaos, half blind. The engine screamed, the air filled with smoke and sweat, and through it all, I felt it, the pulse of the machine's spirit, strong and rhythmic beneath the cacophony. When Soth's trigger jammed, the turret moved on its own, adjusting aim. The cannon fired before he could even call for clearance. The shot struck true, tearing a crater into the enemy's flank. The tank howled as it fired, a sound like triumph or hunger. We fought for hours, driven not by command but by something deeper. Each impact, each explosion, each death outside fed the machine's will. When the battle finally ended, we were still alive. The sergeant stood before the shrine, his armor smeared with soot and blood. "The spirit protects its faithful," he said softly. I looked around at the others. Karen's eyes were glazed. Soth's hands still trembled, and my own fingers were slick with dried blood. Protected? Perhaps. But at what cost? That night, I couldn't sleep. The others snored softly, their bodies slumped against the hull. The air was thick with the scent of iron and sweat. I sat by the shrine, staring at the faint gleam of the icon. "Are you awake?" I whispered. The hull creaked in response. "I don't understand you," I said. "Are you alive? Or are we just mad?" Silence. Then, faintly, a vibration beneath my hand. "Alive," it said, though no words were spoken. The sound was more felt than heard, a resonance that settled in my bones. I pressed my bloodied palm to the shrine. "Then why do you need us?" The answer came like static. "All flesh serves." I withdrew my hand, shivering. The air felt colder suddenly. The shrine's metal was warm to the touch, pulsing faintly. In that moment, I realized that I no longer feared the machine. I revered it, and that was the beginning of my damnation. By morning, the sergeant announced a new ritual. Each dawn, before ignition, one of us would offer blood at the shrine, a small cut, a drop only. He said it kept the spirit calm, that it ensured obedience. None of us protested. The idea felt natural, almost comforting. The first offering was Keren's. He drew his blade without hesitation, slicing across his thumb and pressing it to the brass. The engine started smoother than it ever had. We all smiled, though none of us knew why. From then on, the line between devotion and dependency vanished. We no longer saw the tank as a tool. It was our chapel, our confessor, our God. When the engine idled, we whispered to it. When the vents hissed, we listened. It responded in kind. Lights flickered in rhythm to our prayers. The Vox hummed with approval. The turret turned faster, smoother, deadlier. We had become one. And somewhere deep inside, I think it began to love us in the way a predator loves the hand that feeds it. When we finally rolled out again, the sergeant gave the order not as command, but as benediction. "Let the faithful ride." The engine roared, the ground shook, and the tank surged forward, cutting through the ruins like a beast unleashed. As the cannon thundered, as men screamed and burned outside, I felt a strange peace settle over me. The spirit whispered through the hull, "We are whole." And for the first time, I believed it. Excellent. Let's descend into the next layer of ruin. Here begins your next confession. Asterisk asterisk. Chapter 6. The Burning Plain. Asterisk asterisk. Asterisk. First-person narration, grimdark tone, to 2,000+ words. Asterisk. We reached the plain at dawn, though dawn is too kind a word. The horizon was a smear of ember-colored haze, the sky bruised with smoke. The land itself seemed wounded, black soil cracked open, bleeding fire from beneath. They said it had once been farmland, long before the shells fell, before the rivers ran dry, and the sky became a ceiling of ash. Now it was nothing but a charred expanse, littered with wrecks and bones, some human, some machine, most unrecognizable. The order was simple. Asterisk. Advance. Cleanse. Hold. Asterisk. The Emperor's words, filtered through static, spoken by a voice that had long since forgotten the sound of mercy. Our tank, our God, answered with a roar. The engine's growl rolled through the hull like thunder trapped inside a coffin. Every bolt rattled, every plate sang its grim litany. We had been sealed inside for so long that the sound no longer frightened us. It was the sound of purpose, of inevitability. Keren drove with both hands, gripping the controls as though in prayer. His eyes were red from sleeplessness, but his expression was calm, almost serene. "The ground burns ahead," he murmured, as if reporting weather. "Then drive through it," the sergeant said. "The Emperor's road is never cool." We laughed at that, not with humor, but because there was nothing else left to do. The machine spirit purred beneath us, eager. I could feel it through the deck plates, a vibration that pulsed in rhythm with our hearts. We had long since stopped questioning whether the spirit led us, or we it. We were one, now. A single creature of steel and sinew. The first impact came before we saw the enemy. A shell screamed past, close enough to rattle the optics. Dust rained from the ceiling. "Bearing west," Soth called. "I've got muzzle flashes in the ruins." The sergeant leaned over the scope. "Range?" 800. maybe less. Then give them his light. The cannon fired, and the sound swallowed the world. Outside, something exploded, a flare of white-hot brilliance that seared the inner edges of the viewport. Through the haze I caught a glimpse of figures scattering, burning, disintegrating, the air filled with ash that drifted down like snow. We fired again. And again. The recoil hammered my spine, the vibration numbing my hands. The smell of propellant mixed with sweat, metal, and the faint sweetness of cooked flesh. Karen muttered the times, driver's benediction times, under his breath, steering us through the smoke. His voice was calm, mechanical, his greater than, through faith, I steer. Through will, I endure. Through steel, I am delivered. Every word felt like a heartbeat, every shot a breath. We crushed the enemy beneath our treads without seeing their faces. They were shadows in the smoke, silhouettes that broke apart under pressure. Soth began to weep as he fired, though he never stopped. His tears cut streaks through the grime on his cheeks. "They won't stop coming," he whispered. "They just keep standing up again." "Then keep knocking them down," the sergeant said. His voice was distant, reverent. "The Emperor loves persistence." By midday, the plane was a furnace. The heat inside the tank climbed past survivable. Our uniforms stuck to our skin. The recycled air smelled like a corpse left too long in the Sunday. Karen stripped off his gloves, his hands raw and blistered. "Ventilation's failing," he croaked. "She's running too hot." The sergeant turned toward me. "Adjust the airflow." I checked the controls. The dials flickered erratically, readings spiking and falling at random. The machine spirit was restless again, hungry. "She wants blood," I said before I realized I'd spoken aloud. No one questioned me. The sergeant only nodded once. "Then feed her." I unwrapped my palm, still scarred from the last offering, and drew the blade again. The cut was easier this time, practiced. The blood welled quickly, dark in the red light. I pressed my hand to the shrine. The hull trembled in response. The vents groaned, releasing a slow breath of cooler air. The temperature dropped a few degrees, enough for us to breathe again. Karen exhaled shakily. "Bless her name. She is merciful," the sergeant said. But mercy was not what I felt pulsing beneath the metal. It was pleasure. We advanced deeper into the plane. All around us, the world burned. The ground was cracked and molten in places, streaked with rivers of glowing slag. The air shimmered with heat distortion, blurring the horizon into a mirage of shifting flame. In the distance, wrecked tanks lay half-buried, their hulls twisted like carcasses left to rot. Some still burned from within, fires fed by leaking promethium. Once, we passed what remained of an infantry regiment, charred silhouettes frozen mid-step, weapons melted into their hands. The sight didn't even register anymore. They were scenery now. Soth began to laugh quietly at first, then louder, until it became a harsh, broken sound. "What's funny?" Karen asked without looking up. "They told us this world was cursed," Soth said between breaths. "They were right. But it's not cursed because of them. It's cursed because of us." The sergeant's hand shot out, striking him across the face. "Hold your tongue." Soth spat blood onto the deck. "You can't stop it. You feel it too. The tank's feeding. It's—" The cannon fired again before he could finish. The sergeant's hand was already on the rune. The shot tore through the ruins ahead, silencing everything. Afterward, the sergeant turned back, calm once more. "She demands focus," he said, "not doubt." Soth didn't speak again. That night, if it was night at all, we made camp amidst the wreckage of what used to be a city gate. The walls had collapsed into blackened stone teeth, jutting toward the sky. The air was thick with smoke, and the faint, constant patter of falling ash. We didn't exit the tank. There was nothing outside worth touching. Instead, we sat in the half-darkness, listening to the engine's low hum. It no longer sounded mechanical. It sounded alive, like the breath of a sleeping giant. The sergeant lit a stick of incense and placed it before the shrine. "We are chosen," he said softly. "The others have burned away, but we endure. That is purpose." "So," Karen nodded, eyes closed. She keeps us alive for a reason. Soth stared at the floor. Or because she likes the taste. The sergeant ignored him. He turned to me. The spirit favors you. You hear her clearer than we do. What does she want? I hesitated. I didn't want to say it, but the truth came anyway. More. More. The sergeant smiled faintly. Then we'll give her more. When the offensive resumed, we were at the tip of the spear. We drove into the firestorm without hesitation. Artillery rained from both sides, flashes of white and orange, thunder rolling across the plain. The tank shuddered beneath each near miss, but the hull held. The spirit roared through the engine, driving us faster. The air inside filled with the scream of the machine, the hiss of hydraulics, the rhythmic chant of the sergeant. Is greater than steel is strength. Faith is fire. Flesh is nothing. We repeated it with him until the words lost all meaning. The world outside dissolved into smoke and motion. Enemies emerged only to vanish beneath our fire. We became instruments of annihilation, each shot an act of devotion. The spirit spoke between volleys, her voice a vibration that filled the cabin. Asterisk. Do you see how they fall? How easily they break? This is purity. Asterisk. I felt something inside me crack, not from fear, but from awe. We were killing in the name of a god made of iron, and for the first time, it felt holy. When the smoke cleared, the plane was unrecognizable. Flames still danced across the ground, feeding on the oily soil. The air shimmered with heat and chemical residue. The wind carried the sound of crackling fire and distant screams that faded too quickly to be real. We stopped amid the ruin, surrounded by corpses that still smoldered. The sergeant stood before the shrine, his face illuminated by the flickering lights. The Emperor's will is fulfilled here, he said. We are the hammer that strikes. We are his fire. Soth finally broke. He slammed his fist against the wall. Stop saying his name. You think he watches this? You think he cares? The sergeant turned slowly, his expression unreadable. He cares through the machine. Through her. Soth laughed bitterly. Then she's no saint, she's a daemon. The lights flickered violently. The engine roared, unprompted. The hull vibrated with sudden, furious life. Soth stumbled back, wide-eyed. I didn't mean. The cannon fired. None of us touched the controls. The recoil threw us against the walls. Through the viewport, I saw a figure running one of the survivors from the last engagement just before the shell hit. The explosion turned him into a flash of red mist. The tank fell silent again. The air smelled of ozone and burning. The sergeant crossed himself with oil-stained fingers. Blasphemy answered. Soth stared at the smoking barrel. That wasn't me. But the sergeant only smiled. She forgives. Serve her, and she will protect. We stayed on the plane for 3 more days, though we had no orders. The Vox was dead again, its only sound, the faint static that sometimes shaped itself into words I didn't want to understand. We burned everything we saw, outposts, wrecks, the remains of villages that might once have been homes. The spirit guided our aim. The sergeant stopped consulting maps. We didn't need them anymore. By the end, the sky itself seemed to bleed. The ash fell thicker, coating the tank in grey that turned darker with every mile. Inside, the shrine pulsed with light that no longer came from the lumen strips. I no longer felt like I was sitting inside the tank. I felt like I was inside a living thing, and it was inside me. That night, as we idled among the fires, I whispered to the spirit, "What are we now?" The answer came like a sigh through the vents. Chosen. Bound. Eternal. And though every part of me screamed that it was wrong, I smiled. Because eternity, at least, meant no end. Understood we'll move into the penultimate descent. The end before the end. Asterisk asterisk. Chapter 7. The Last Shell asterisk asterisk. Asterisk. First-person narration. Grimdark tone to 2,000+ words. Asterisk. The burning plain bled into the hills, and the hills into the ridge. Beyond it waited the last defense line of whatever enemy still lived. The map was gone. The Vox was dead. Command no longer spoke. But the sergeant told us the Emperor's will had not changed. Asterisk. Advance until all motion stops. Asterisk. By then, we had one shell left. The magazines were empty, the racks stripped bare. The last shell rested in its cradle like an idol, engraved with a dozen cracked purity seals that fluttered whenever the tank exhaled. Rill's blood still stained the loader's rack. No one had bothered to clean it. We told ourselves that it pleased the spirit. Karen was coughing up soot. Soth's eyes had sunk deep into his skull, twin hollows rimmed in red. The sergeant moved slower now, but his voice never faltered. The tank itself seemed stronger than ever, its engine heartbeat steady, its heat constant, the metal around us humming faintly like a living throat. We had become part of her completely, and she of us. The ridge rose before us like the lip of a wound. The enemy waited beyond it, though I never knew who they were anymore. They had no faces, no insignia, just motion in the smoke and flashes of muzzle light. The plain behind us burned, and the sky was a dome of shifting scarlet. The sergeant stood beneath the hatch, periscope lenses reflecting the firelight. "We reach the crest," he said. "Then we end it. The Emperor witnesses all deeds, even those done in silence." Karen gunned the throttle. The engine roared its ascent. The climb began. The treads chewed through ash and bone alike. The hull tilted forward, groaning with strain. Through the viewport, I saw nothing but firelight and drifting embers. The air inside grew hotter with every meter. Soth manned the gun, one hand resting on the shell as though touching a relic. "One left," he said softly. "You think she knows?" The sergeant didn't answer. "She always knows," Karen whispered. "She can taste it." I tried the Vox again out of reflex. Static. Then faintly a voice buried deep within it, like something speaking from the bottom of a grave. Asterisk. "Do not fear the end. It is the beginning." Asterisk. I shut it off immediately, but the words remained in my head, echoing like tinnitus. The ridge erupted before we reached the top. A shell struck close to our left flank, throwing the tank sideways. The hull slammed into the ground with a screech of tortured metal. Warning runes flickered across every screen. Karen fought the controls, teeth gritted. Tracks holding, drive stabilizers at 60. The sergeant barked orders through the chaos. "Return fire! Fire at will!" Soth cursed, slamming his fist against the loading lever. "No ammo. I told you one shell left." "Then make it count!" The sergeant roared. We crawled up the final incline, treads grinding through slag and bone. Incoming rounds pinged against the hull, each impact a hammer blow. One round cracked a vision port. Dust and smoke poured through the gap. Soth loaded the final shell. His hands trembled, but the motion was reverent. He pressed his forehead to the casing for a brief second, whispering a prayer I couldn't hear. The sergeant looked down at me. "Vox check. Nothing but static." He nodded slowly. "Then we end it alone." The ridge crest appeared before us, black silhouettes moving beyond it, hundreds of them, figures swarming like insects, closing in through the haze. Karen shouted, "They're too close!" Soth swung the turret, tracking as best he could through the smoke. His voice broke as he called out, "Target locked. Range. Point blank." The sergeant hesitated for half a heartbeat, as if savoring it. Then, fire. The cannon roared. Light swallowed everything. The recoil threw us backward. My teeth cracked together with the force. The world outside vanished into white. Heat filled the cabin. A pure, searing wave that washed over us, stripping breath and thought alike. The explosion's sound didn't reach us immediately. For a moment there was only silence, a void. Then it came, an all-consuming scream of tearing metal and shattering earth. The hull buckled. Sparks rained from the ceiling. The lights burst one by one. The sergeant fell against the shrine, his face half lit by firelight. "Praise," he began, but the word died in his throat. Karen's controls melted under his hands. He didn't even scream, he just stared, unblinking, as smoke rose from his palms. Soth was laughing again, his voice high and broken. "You see it? You see it? She's free!" The hull screamed. I mean that literally at times, screamed asterisk. Metal doesn't make that sound, not even when it tears. It was the sound of something alive being ripped open. The machine spirit roared through every panel, every circuit, every breath. The Vox came alive, spewing static that formed half words, half moan. Asterisk, you are mine, you are mine, you are mine. Asterisk. I tried to reach the hatch, but the handle burned my hand. The metal glowed red. Smoke filled the cabin. My eyes watered until I saw nothing but light. The sergeant was on his knees, clutching the icon against his chest. His armor was melting. Glory be. The heat swallowed the rest. Karen slumped forward over the controls, his flesh fusing to them. The smell was unbearable, burnt oil and skin and incense all mixed into one choking cloud. Soth kept laughing until his voice dissolved into coughing. Then silence. The shrine burst into flame. The Aquila melted. The blood on the walls bubbled and ran. Somewhere beneath the noise, beneath the fire, I heard the spirit whisper again. Asterisk, you offered me faith. Now offer me yourselves. Asterisk. The hull began to close. I don't know how else to describe it. The interior seemed to shrink, plates twisting inward, as if the tank were inhaling deeply, drawing us in. I tried to scream, but the air was gone. Light. Heat. Then, nothing. I don't know how long I drifted in that emptiness. Time had no meaning there. I only knew the sound, the slow, rhythmic thump of the engine still alive somewhere beyond me. When I opened my eyes, everything was dark. The tank was silent. The fires had died. The world outside was gone. No sound, no wind, no voices. Only the faint glow of the cogitator runes, still pulsing like a heartbeat. I was the only one left. The others were absorbed, maybe. I could feel them in the walls, in the vibrations, in the whispers that moved through the pipes like breath. I touched the shrine. The metal was cold now, but beneath it something moved. Asterisk, we are one, asterisk, said the voice, and I understood. The tank had drunk us, as it had always promised to. I tried to move. My arms responded slowly, as though pushing through oil. My breath rasped against the inside of the rebreather. Every inhalation brought the taste of ash and iron. The Vox clicked faintly. Any units? Respond. The voice was faint, distant, one of ours maybe, though I couldn't tell anymore. I reached for the mic, my fingers trembling. This is... Static swallowed the words. Then, beneath the interference, I heard another sound, laughter. Not human. Metallic. Echoing through the frequencies. Asterisk. No more orders. Only me. Asterisk. The Vox died. I sat in the dark for what felt like hours. The hull creaked occasionally, expanding and contracting like lungs. The smell of burnt flesh had faded into something almost sweet. I spoke aloud, though there was no one left to hear. Is this victory? The spirit's answer was soft, almost kind. Asterisk. This is forever. Asterisk. And in that moment, I believed her, because outside, the war would continue. The guns would roar, the dust would fall, but inside this steel tomb, time had ended. When the dawn finally came, or what passed for dawn, the light leaked through the cracks in the armor, weak and colorless. The hatch would not open. I didn't try again. I pressed my hand to the wall. It was warm, pulsing faintly. Somewhere deep within the machine, the engine began to hum again. The vibration traveled through the floor, into my bones, until I felt it in my teeth, in my heartbeat. The spirit was still alive, still hungry, and I was part of her now. Asterisk. Asterisk. Chapter 8. Entombed in Steel. Asterisk. 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 First-person narration, to 2,000+ words. Grimdark confessional tone. Asterisk. I woke to darkness. Not the kind that comes with sleep, but the deeper sort, the darkness that has weight, that presses down like earth on a grave. There was no sound at first. No motion. No breath but my own. The engine had fallen silent at last, and the absence of its heartbeat felt obscene. For a long while, I didn't move. I couldn't. My limbs were heavy, the air too thick to swallow. I thought perhaps I was dead. If only that had been true. The first sensation to return was pain, dull, constant, everywhere. The sort that doesn't come from a wound, but from the body itself rejecting what it has become. My skin itched beneath the grime, my joints ached like rusting hinges. Every inhale brought the taste of oil and iron, the smell of burnt flesh that had soaked so deeply into the air it had become a part of it. I tried to speak. The sound was a rasp, more breath than word. "Hello?" No answer. Only the faint groan of settling metal, as though the tank was listening. I lay there for what could have been hours, or days. The light that filtered through the cracked lumen strips flickered dimly, fading with each pulse. When I finally moved, the sound startled me, my own armor scraping against the deck. I sat up slowly. The cabin was blackened, walls streaked with soot. The shrine was a melted shape of brass and ash. The bodies were gone. Not times absent asterisk. Gone. No bone, no flesh. Just impressions on the deck plating where they had fallen, burned outlines that flaked away when I touched them. I should have wept. I didn't. Instead, I listened. Somewhere deep inside the hull, beyond the bulkheads, there was a sound. Faint. Rhythmic. A heartbeat. The machine spirit was still alive. I don't remember standing, but I must have, because suddenly I was at the shrine again. The brass had melted and rehardened into a strange, warped relief, something that might once have been an aquila, now resembling a skull with outstretched wings. I reached out. The metal was warm. The warmth pulsed. Asterisk. "You live." Asterisk, said the voice. It wasn't sound as much as vibration, the hull itself speaking through my bones. "Yes," I whispered. "I think so." Asterisk. "You are mine." Asterisk. The words were neither command nor comfort. They were fact. I wanted to deny it. I wanted to scream. But all that came out was a low, broken laugh. "Yes," I said again. "I suppose I am." The tank sighed. Metal shifting, plates contracting. The air vents hissed softly, releasing a breath that smelled of incense and blood. Asterisk. "Good." Asterisk, it said. Asterisk. "We remember together." Asterisk. The Vox hummed back to life some time later. I don't know how long I'd been sitting there, minutes, hours, a lifetime. Static filled the air, then fragments of sound. A voice, distant and cold, filtered through the interference. Sector command. All armor units respond. Casualties total. Sector. It faded, replaced by another voice, one I knew. "Karen. Not alive. Not quite dead. Drive steady," he whispered through the static. "Blessed pressure, blessed track." I froze. "Karen?" Silence. Then Soth's voice joined his, faint, overlapping. "Target locked. Elevation 30. Fire." Their words came and went in fragments, echoes of memory replaying endlessly through the Vox. The sound twisted together until it became a chorus of ghosts. I wanted to shut it off, but I couldn't. The switch had fused. The spirit spoke again, low and amused. Asterisk. "They remain. All flesh serves." Asterisk. "You killed them," I said. Asterisk. "I kept them." Asterisk. I felt my throat tighten. "Why?" "Because you asked for eternity." And I remembered. The oath. The prayers. The blood. All the times we begged for endurance, for survival, for purpose. The tank had only given what we'd asked for. At some point, I realized I could no longer feel my legs. I looked down and saw why. The deck plating had changed. The seams had closed around my boots, the metal fused to the greaves of my armor. It had grown around me, like scar tissue. When I tried to pull free, the hull resisted. A sound rose in response, something between a growl and a sigh. "Please," I whispered. Asterisk. "Be still." Asterisk, the voice said. Asterisk. "You are home." Asterisk. And the more it spoke, the more its tone changed from the flat drone of machinery to something almost human, familiar. It was the sergeant's voice now. "You swore obedience," it said. "You promised your life to the hull." I shook my head. I didn't mean. The walls pulsed around me, the lights flickering. Asterisk. Meaning is for the living. You are part of the machine now. Asterisk. I tried to scream, but the air tasted of rust. The hull vibrated beneath my skin, through my bones, into my thoughts. And then I heard them again, the voices of my crew, whispering from the metal. Drive steady. Range confirmed. Fire. Their words were monotone, endless, like a prayer without beginning or end. The spirit's tone softened. Asterisk. See. You are not alone. Asterisk. I pressed my palms against the hull. The warmth there felt alive, pulsing in rhythm with my own heartbeat. For a moment, I couldn't tell which was which. Days passed. Or perhaps weeks. The outside world returned in glimpses through the viewport dust storms, the occasional flicker of distant fire, no movement of life. The Vox whispered new voices, sometimes other regiments, other wars. None near enough to matter. They came and went, like ghosts crossing through static. I began to speak back to them. Sometimes words, sometimes only breath. I don't know if they heard. I don't know if anyone did. But the spirit listened. It told me things. Of the wars that came before, when it had carried other crews, other names. Of the worlds it had burned, the prayers it had been fed. Asterisk. They always ask for the same thing. Asterisk, it said. Asterisk. To be remembered. To be eternal. And so I give them this. Asterisk. Are there others like you? I asked. Asterisk. All of us are like me. All of us are one. Asterisk. I thought about that for a long time. Somewhere, across the endless void of war, other tanks were whispering the same words to their dead. I don't sleep anymore. The tank doesn't allow it. Whenever I begin to drift, it fills the silence with memories, mine, theirs, its own. I see the plane burning again. The dust, the siege, the oath. I smell the incense, hear the gunfire, feel the shudder of recoil in my ribs. And always, always, the whisper. Asterisk. You asked for forever. Asterisk. Sometimes, when the wind outside shifts, I hear echoes of battle, distant artillery, the rattle of chains. Maybe it's real. Maybe it's only the tank dreaming. Either way, I stay awake and listen. The hull is changing again. What was once cold iron now feels like flesh, warm, pliant, trembling when I touch it. My gauntlets have fused to my hands. The metal has grown over my skin in places, thin as wax. I can feel the current of power flowing through it, pulsing like blood. The spirit says, it's a blessing. Asterisk, you are becoming. Asterisk, it tells me. Asterisk, you are shedding weakness. You are the vessel now. Asterisk, I no longer argue. The pain fades when I accept it. When I close my eyes, I can see through the walls. Not with sight, but with awareness. I feel the tank's tracks resting against the earth, the wind pushing dust against its sides, the slow corrosion spreading across the armor like lichen. I feel the worms beneath the soil. I feel the rot. It's beautiful. I don't know what year it is. I don't know if the war ended. Sometimes I hear engines in the distance, new ones, young ones. They pass near, then fade. None stop. Perhaps they think this tank is a ruin, a relic too far gone. They are right, in a way, but sometimes, when they pass, the Vox comes alive just for a moment. The spirit speaks through me. Asterisk. Advance. Asterisk. And I hear their engines answer. The war continues. Once, I tried to remember my name, not the rank, not the service number. The Times name asterisk. The one I had before the oath, before the steel. It's gone. The tank took it. Or perhaps I gave it willingly. The spirit calls me Time's voice asterisk. It says, I am the mouth through which it prays. That every confession I make becomes another bolt in its frame, another hymn in its endless liturgy. Sometimes I wonder if there were others before me who served the same purpose, voices that spoke to it when no one else remained. If there were, they're still here. I can feel them in the hull, whispering with me in a choir that never ends. I think the sun has died. The light through the viewport is weaker each day. The sky outside is grey, unchanging, no birds, no wind, only the dust. The spirit says this is peace. Asterisk. The flesh world fades, the machine endures. Asterisk. I believe it now. The wars will end, the Imperium will crumble, the stars themselves will burn out, but the tank will remain. It will sit here beneath the ash, dreaming, whispering, waiting for the next pilgrim to uncover it. And when they do, I will greet them through the vox. They will think it is the spirit speaking. Perhaps it will be. I used to fear being forgotten. That was the worst sin a man could imagine, dying in silence, with no one left to speak his name. But now I understand. Being remembered is worse. Memory is the chain that binds. It keeps you here, half alive, half machine, praying to an engine that never stops hungering. The Emperor is far away. The spirit is close, and I am part of it now, forever. I hear footsteps sometimes. Maybe they're real. Maybe they're the echoes of those who came before. They move across the hull, slow, deliberate. The dust shifts above me. Asterisk. They're coming. Asterisk. The spirit whispers. For me? I ask. Asterisk. For us? Asterisk. I almost smile. The hatch creaks overhead. Light spills through a hairline crack, cold and sterile. I hear muffled voices, young, eager, ignorant. An old pattern, one says. Still sealed. Should we open it? Another asks. Yes, the spirit says through my mouth. Open it. They can't hear me. But they will. Soon. Outside, the war still grinds on. Inside, I wait. The engine stirs again, faintly, as if dreaming of movement. The shrine glows red in the dark. And when the next crew climbs inside, when they kneel before the altar and whisper the oath of steel, I'll be there, listening, teaching, becoming. The tank is eternal. The spirit is eternal. And now, so am I, entombed in steel, forever. We are. We are. We are. They will find this tank someday, maybe. Buried beneath dust and ruin. They'll scrape away the rust and paint the Aquila anew. They'll call it a relic, a survivor of holy war. They'll climb inside, light the incense, and whisper the prayers. They'll never know that I'm still here, listening, waiting, that the hull is not empty, that the spirit still breathes, that the last shell was not the last death.